see the slide up so that you know that you're in the right session. This is ditching the stipend compensation mentality in favor of a growth mindset. And our presenter is Kathy Lanedecker, and she's the Associate Head of Finance and Operations at Cal-ISBOA School in Palo Alto. We are going to, I think we're all kind of getting the hang of this now if you've been in previous presentations. If you have questions, please put them in the chat and we'll be taking a look at them and we'll get to them as they are appropriate, or certainly by the end of the presentation. And it looks like we are just about ready to go. So I'm going to turn this over to Kathy.
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me, Martha?
Yep.
Okay, great. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I hope that this will be time well spent for you. And we really appreciate your interest in kind of what we've done in Cal-ISBOA around compensation, and particularly in promoting a growth mindset. Okay, so I always like to start with a little context, and some of this will resonate with a lot of you, and for others, you may have different contexts. But Cal-ISBOA is, I guess, by West Coast standards, a relatively old school. We've been around almost as long as the city of Palo Alto, in which we are located. Like many of you, if not all of you, we have a very high cost of living. I was really stunned a year ago when I found the statistic that Palo Alto is now more expensive to live in than London, which I've always thought of sort of the gold standard for cost of living. But you know, this is something we're up against, and many of you are up against as well. We also find ourselves situated very close to Stanford University. We're within a couple of blocks, and this proximity is, I would say, a blessing and a curse. You know, we have a lot of parents, of course, who teach at Stanford or administrators at Stanford, and that's often held up as the standard of, well, you know, Stanford's doing this and Stanford's doing that. And in this case, I think it was quite helpful. The other context that we find ourselves within is that, you know, we are in the heart of the Silicon Valley, and the innovation that is going on around us on a daily basis, I think really challenges us as a school to be innovative, both in our program and also in our administrative practices. But I thought that this all would be helpful as a backdrop, kind of as we talk about kind of our process and where we ended up. So objectives, you know, whenever you embark on a program like this or a process like this, it's really important to sort of understand what your underlying objectives are. And some of these will look quite familiar to you. We wanted to make sure we were remaining competitive in terms of how we were compensating our faculty. We wanted to make sure we were attracting and retaining the best talent. Like many of you, we also were very interested in exploring excellence, what that looks like, and how we reward that in the context of a compensation program. And also how we inspire faculty to sort of, again, have that growth mindset of working towards their own excellence. Then we also really wanted to have a program where faculty could exercise agency, they could self-advocate. We wanted transparency, and we wanted accountability. So these were all sort of the driving objectives as we embarked on this process. And then sort of as often happens along the way, we identified some other things that we really valued and thought were really important to this process. And I think, you know, if there's one one of the messages I'd like to leave behind is that I think it's really important to be open to mid-course corrections in a process like this. This was a very long process, as you'll see in a second. I have provided a timeline, and we'll get to that in a second. But being flexible and really sort of listening attentively for things that can improve where you end up is really important. So I would say some of the objectives that came up in the course of our process was that, number one, I guess this really should say newer faculty or less experienced faculty as opposed to young faculty, although many of them are young. We really wanted a way that faculty who are newer to teaching could get up the compensation curve faster. You know, in today's world, they're seeing a lot of their peers from the colleges and universities they attended going into banking and tech and other things. And that doesn't have sort of a lockstep based on years of experience type progression that we have traditionally had in schools. And we wanted to give our young faculty or newer faculty the opportunity to earn more money earlier in their career if they demonstrate the kind of excellence in leadership that we wanted to see in all our faculty. The second piece is leadership. And as you'll see, this is a very important component of the program that we ended up developing. And when I say leadership, I'm not talking about kind of, I think how we traditionally think about it, like being a department chair or spearheading a task force. This is really about leadership in sharing a faculty member's practice with other faculty members so that our program would inspire faculty to impact not just the students in their own classroom, but the students throughout our campus, because they were providing leadership to their colleagues around certain practices that were very effective for them in their individual classrooms. And then, of course, and it's in the title of this workshop, we also were hoping to eliminate stipends. And as you'll see, we've had some success with that as well. So here's the promised timeline. And one thing that I really want to impress upon you is that this kind of process, this kind of sort of transformational change in how you're compensating your faculty has to be or should be a very deliberate process involving a lot of input, particularly from faculty, and that you have to be patient and give it some time. So as you can see, that basically from start to finish, it took us about 4 years from the time that we first started talking to faculty, brought in a consultant, John Littleford, to talk about alternative compensation programs for faculty, and formed 3 committees, one on evaluation, one on compensation, and one on benefits. So that all happened in March of 2013, and it wasn't until February of 2017 that we issued faculty contracts based on our new compensation scheme. So in between those 2 points, we developed compensation philosophy, we developed an evaluation system and identified a tool. We then consolidated our 3 committees into a single committee with representation from each of the 3 committees we'd started with. And then when we rolled it out in a very deliberate way. We first put the faculty on the new evaluation system. Then the next year, we put the faculty on the matrix, but did not compensate them based on that. And then it wasn't until a year later that they were actually compensated based on the matrix system. And the other thing that I'll say, it's an aside, particularly for the CFOs on the call, is that we also set aside funding in advance, because we knew that if we were switching to a new program, there would have to be some kind of increase in compensation. You certainly couldn't reduce compensation at a time that you're asking faculty to think very differently about how they're being evaluated and how they're being compensated. So I'm jumping ahead to where we went in January of 2015, which is when we consolidated those 3 committees into a single committee. It had 12 faculty, 3 administrators. I was one of them, the head of school, and our basically the equivalent of our academic dean. She actually has a different title. And then we had 3 trustees. Those trustees had been co-leads of each of the 3 earlier committees. With a faculty member. And it was the 3 faculty members who had partnered with those board members that led this compensation task force. So it was not led by our head of school, it was not led by our academic dean, it was not led by me, it was led by the 3 teachers. And I think that that was incredibly important and gave the process a lot of credibility with the faculty. So this group was tasked with, going back to the faculty input we had already received and then continuing to solicit input over time. We continued to work on the evaluation system that was originally proposed by the evaluation committee, and that included the use of a tool called Folio, which I believe many of you also use. We looked at research, and then we began to, in earnest, roll up our sleeves and draft some documents. So having a philosophy, we thought, was absolutely critical to, again, grounding this in the why, and then also connecting it to how. So as you can see, there's several things that are highlighted. That one, our expectations for our teachers, that kind of a minimum expectation is that they demonstrate pedagogical expertise and mastery of content, that they're committed to growth and to collaboration, and that in order to do this, this is where you get into the how, we want to reward outstanding teaching and individual levels of engagement and leadership, innovation, and professional development. And that's back to what I was talking about before, where how you're sharing your practice with your colleagues and inspiring your colleagues is critical to how you're compensated at Cal-ISBOA. And that we would use those things to create a tiered structure for compensating our faculty. We also thought it was important to start with some essential questions, just as one does in the classroom. We thought that was very important in this situation. And, we throw around the word excellence quite a bit in the independent school world, but what does make an excellent teacher? And what makes an excellent faculty member? So 2 slightly different things. One is how you're impacting your students. The other is how you're impacting your colleagues and really the overall community. And then it was also really important for us to think about and examine what is our standard at Cal-ISBOA for faculty, and how quickly do we expect new faculty to get to that standard. So in terms of the documents that I had mentioned earlier, the tools that you're using for this is critical, obviously. The extent to which the evaluation system works is critical to buy into the overall compensation system. And so, as I mentioned, we selected Folio. We really like Folio because it's essentially a repository for faculty, their peers, their evaluators to provide input, feedback, can post projects they've worked on or new curriculum they've developed. And it really encourages a closed feedback loop so that there's constant conversation and you don't sort of lose track of all that information. And as I said, making sure that that works effectively is so what did our document look like? Well, it is, I don't know how many pages, 20, 30, 40 pages of detailed information about expectations from faculty in all of these different dimensions. And we have teaching dimensions, which is, again, about teaching excellence. And then we have faculty member dimensions, which is really about leadership and collaboration. It's intricate and detailed. I wouldn't call it complicated because I think it's very well thought out and straightforward, but there's a lot of depth there. And it's, again, I think that's very necessary to have the process and program having credibility. So I thought that I would highlight just two aspects of how faculty are evaluated just as examples for you. One, and the teaching dimensions, implementation and delivery within that, and the other, collaborator on the faculty dimension. So on the implementation dimension, delivery, you can see that there is a description of what a strong faculty member looks like, an excellent faculty member, and an exemplary faculty member. And there is this type of description for every single one of the categories that you see on this slide. So, you know, you can look at time management, structured time effectively, and then under excellent, crafts intentional transitions, gauges students' understanding and responds appropriately. Exemplary, exhibits passion for subject and joy in student learning, adapts to changing circumstances with ease, etc. Then on the collaborator side, again, they're rated either strong, excellent, or exemplary in each of the categories. You know, it goes from when you're strong, you participate in professional development, to exemplary, you're leading initiatives and you're balancing the needs of very varied collaborators. So there's a whole spectrum in between, but each faculty member is evaluated along this continuum. So this is what the overall matrix itself looks like. We basically have 6 different boxes, if you will, in which a faculty member can be placed. The far left column, teacher and accomplished teacher, is really only for newer faculty. The middle is really, I mentioned earlier, you know, what is the standard? The standard at Cal-ISBOA is really that center column. And so it's our expectation that faculty move from the leftmost column to the middle column, you know, in fairly short order. And then on the far right is the column that really incorporates incredible contributions to the community outside of the classroom with excellence in teaching. So how does a faculty member move from one box to the other? When we bring in new faculty, we do not put them on the matrix yet, which is a little complicated and a little tricky. It's a little bit more of a more traditional approach where we look at their years of experience and then look at the salary ranges in the teacher and the accomplished teacher box and try to match that as best we can with the experience level of that faculty member. But everybody comes in the range within those 2 boxes, and they have to teach for 2 years, during which time they will be evaluated, but they aren't actually placed on the matrix until the start of their 3rd year of teaching. Once they're placed on the matrix, and you could be placed almost anywhere on this matrix once you've been at Cal-ISBOA a couple of years. Now, I will say that I don't think we have placed any of our newer faculty in the far right column once their 2 years were up. I think everybody has either stayed in the first column, which is something that then you need to pay attention to, or they have been placed more typically in the second column. And the process for movement is typically moving from one box to the other. If you're the box at the top, you typically move down, for example, from master teacher to senior master teacher. And then if based on your performance, you're ready for another move, you would move from senior master teacher to teacher leader. Having said that, there are examples of faculty members who have leapfrogged particular boxes. So it is possible, for example, to go from accomplished teacher directly to senior master teacher, or from master teacher directly to teacher leader. So it does not have to necessarily be lockstep. The other thing that we did from a financial standpoint as we were embarking on this is we tried to predict what we thought the distribution would be of faculty members in these different columns. And originally we thought it would be somewhere like 15 to 20% in the far left column, 60%, so by far the majority of our faculty in the center, and then, 20, maybe 25% in the far right. The other thing that I will mention is that, we did establish salary ranges for each of these boxes. They are overlapping for the most part because within each box, you are compensated based on your years of experience. So it is a little bit old school once you get your placement. We don't really distinguish within the box like you're a 10 on the senior master teacher scale versus a 5. We just say you're a senior master teacher with 7 years experience versus you're a senior master teacher with 14 years of experience, and the person with more experience is higher within the range, but the ranges are overlapping. So you can be a senior master teacher who's highly experienced, who might be making something similar to somebody with very few years of teaching experience who's in the teacher leader category.
Kathy, I'm wondering if this might be a good time for a poll.
Oh, thank you. I almost forgot. Yes, it would. Okay, here's our first question for you. How is your faculty's compensation currently determined?
We'll give you a few more seconds. Is everybody seeing that poll? Got it?
Almost
Okay.
everybody but one has responded, it looks like. So
okay. So here's the results.
Here's the results. Sorry, I didn't realize you hadn't seen them. So yeah, it looks like over 60% of you have a sort of a traditional salary scale plus stipends, which is exactly where Castellea was before we embarked on this. So that sounds very, very familiar.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. All right, sorry, it's my first time polling. So the promotional system itself, there are two ways that a faculty member can move up in the matrix once they've been placed there. One is at their request, and the other is initiated by the school. And we've had both cases occur. I'd say it's more typical that faculty requests it, but we have had a couple of instances where it was just clear that faculty had evolved and grown, and we really wanted to acknowledge that with higher compensation, and yet they were so focused on their teaching and their sharing of their practice that it didn't occur to them to sort of make the request. So we do try to be mindful of those who are not always looking out for their best interest as we would like. So as I said earlier, we've sort of freed ourselves from a purely experience-based salary determination to recognizing and encouraging growth in faculty members.
Kathy, let me know if this is going to be covered later, but we have had a question about other factors that may influence placement into the system, and specifically the teacher's education, and if that factored into their placement into the compensation.
Sure, yeah, I'll answer that now. Great question, because I did skip over that. So what we do is we give 1 additional year of experience for advanced degrees. And we don't differentiate between, you know, a single advanced degree like a master's versus a master's and a PhD versus 3 masters. You just move up 1 year from an experience standpoint on the scale. But the other thing I will offer is that, you know, the evaluation, and maybe I do get to this later, I'm trying to remember, the evaluation includes a lot of observation, but it also includes student surveys and other input, which, you know, can be tricky. And I think one of the things that I'm probably not the best person to talk about, but I could certainly connect you with somebody at Castellet who could, is that I think we've learned a lot as we've gone along in terms of how we weigh and balance the different factors that are brought to bear in determining matrix placement. And we've made some adjustments to that as we've gone along. So thank you for that question. So along those lines, we try to make the evaluation as concrete and fact and evidence-based as we can. And we all know that that's tricky when you're talking about teaching, because it's not entirely a science. There's an art to teaching, and trying to distill that down to facts or evidence is not easy. But we try to do that as best we can so that we can have very concrete conversations with faculty members who want to move up in their in the matrix, showing them where they have definitely made progress, and showing them, most importantly, where we expect them to make progress if they want to move up. The other thing that I alluded to earlier that I just want to point out is that that first column, as I said, is really intended for teachers in their first few years of teaching at Castellet. And if they remain in that column after 3 years, being placed there for 3 years, it's clear that we need to be having conversations. And I think that's always a tricky thing in a school, is identifying those teachers and also kind of getting motivated to have those conversations, because they're hard conversations. And one of the beauties of this system is that when a faculty member is sort of stuck, if you will, in that first column, it prompts you to ask the question, are we missing something? Should they have been moved forward, or are they missing something? And is this therefore somebody that needs to be on some kind of more deliberate performance review? So I think that's actually been a huge asset that we had not thought about at all going into this process, is that it really is a very clear way to identify those who should be really on some kind of program for improvement. The other thing that I would say that we did not do up front, and that we're starting to do and we need to do better, is that you should, with a system like this, have some kind of guidelines as to how long a faculty member needs to demonstrate the kind of objectives that you've set for them. So let's say, you know, you have a faculty member, I'll just do something very straightforward, who just isn't returning homework to students as quickly as they should, or in as timely manner as they should. And you talk to them about that and say that, you know, their movement hinges on that. Do they need to show you that for 3 weeks, 2 months, a year? You know, what is the standard in terms of how long you need to see that so that you know that's really become a habit and really what they do as a teacher, as opposed to something that they're sort of addressing in the moment. And I don't mean that the faculty member would be doing that in a malicious way. It's just, I think we all know that it takes a while to really form habits. And so what should that look like? The other thing that we also are starting to talk about is there a time frame during which a faculty member needs to be in a certain placement in the box before they can request another move? So in other words, if you just were moved to teacher leader from senior master teacher this year, can you now start talking about moving to distinguished teacher leader the next year? We really hadn't had conversations about that, and we're just starting to do that. And then the other thing that I learned the hard way this year is that you probably should have some rules around how many can be moved in a given year. You know, our total faculty, we have something like 55 faculty members. We moved 8 people this year. That was really tough from a budget standpoint. And to the extent that, you know, you don't want to hold teachers back, so I'm not suggesting that. And at the same time, you have to be realistic about the economics of moving that many faculty in a single year. So that's the other thing that we've started to talk about is how do we do this in a way that we can maybe avoid lumpy years like that, if you will. Okay, next, so transition is always challenging, and I would say that first year when we placed everybody on the matrix was by far the hardest year, and this is how it went. So we asked faculty to evaluate themselves and to place themselves on the matrix. We then, in parallel, had administrators evaluating the faculty. Sorry, that's my dog. Somebody's supposed to take care of that in a minute. The administrators then looked at how faculty evaluated themselves and compared it to where administrators had placed them. And the good news is that for the most part, there was almost a perfect match between where our administrators placed the faculty and where they placed themselves. So that was very encouraging. But there were that handful of faculty, I'd say there were 3 to 5, who had placed themselves higher than we had placed them. And those were very difficult conversations. And that's where the concrete nature of the evaluation tool is so important, because those administrators had to point at very specific things and raise very specific examples related to those things to demonstrate why the faculty member had been in one box and not another. I also want to mention that, or actually I'll get to that in the next slide. So this is what I've just been talking about, the communication of the placement to the faculty member. Now, one thing I think we learned in retrospect is that we should have allowed more time for those conversations. I think they would have been harder anyway, but because we were rushing to get faculty contracts out, there was just not enough time between when those placements in the matrix were determined and when we sent out faculty contracts. There wasn't enough room in between to have those conversations. So I would say, I think we only had like a month or something, and that was just not enough. So this is what our annual review and evaluation process looks like. And I think the first thing to notice is this really is a year-round process. It's very focused on goal setting. There's revisitation of the goals. It's very much a partnership between the faculty member and the administrator who's evaluating them. This is a very, very time-intensive process. We have 3 administrators who basically split, well now 4, who split up all the faculty to be sort of the primary person on a group of faculty. So we have our academic dean, our head of our middle school, our head of our upper school, and our dean of faculty. So each of them take a group of faculty that they're responsible for, and then the 4 of them are coming together regularly so to make sure that there's consistency across how we're implementing both the evaluation system and the matrix tool. But this is, like I said, very time consuming. It's done annually. I would say our faculty in general are incredibly appreciative for the depth and the extent of the feedback. But this is a very resource-rich process. And I just want to be clear that everybody is evaluated every year, not just those people who are up for a new matrix placement. So maybe we'll do another poll now. Let's see. Okay, there we go. I found it. Poll number 2. Here you go. So do you have a well-established faculty evaluation system? This is just a yes or no. I think we have a few more people who haven't responded if you want to get your responses in. Okay, so how do I? Okay, so as you can see, it's pretty much 50-50. Schools that do and schools that don't. And again, I can't overemphasize how important it is if you want to develop a system, you know, not identical to this one, but something of this sort that really connects evaluation to compensation. It's really important that you have a very well-evolved evaluation system with strong buy-in from faculty that the right things are being evaluated. All right, so outcomes. Okay, so this isn't, the median, this isn't exactly the right slide, so I apologize. First of all, this transition was expensive, which I'd mentioned before. First of all, the median salary increase in the first year was 10%, and mission accomplished on getting newer faculty up the salary scale faster, 21% increase on median for faculty with less than 10 years of teaching experience. There also has been a higher percentage of faculty placed in the far right column than we had expected. And, you know, like your schools, we have a lot of very motivated, ambitious faculty members and a lot of excellent faculty members. And everybody wants to be in that far right column. So rather than being distributed sort of that 20-60-20, we've ended up more like 9% in the far left column, 54% in the far right, or in the middle column, and 37% in the far right column. So it's been a little more expensive than we had hoped. The faculty reaction, as I said, the first year placement was rough. And once we got past that, we're finding that faculty are listening much more attentively to feedback. Faculty members that were hearing this very same feedback under our old system are all of a sudden responding to that feedback and really making improvements in those areas that we've been talking about for multiple years. We've also seen faculty really increasing their self-advocacy, which again was something that we really was a primary objective of this process. So we're really pleased about that they own this, they see it as a partnership, and they understand their role in it. Let's see, and then stipends, there are definitely fewer stipends, but they are not eliminated. We are down about 50% in the amount of stipends we're paying relative to where we were at the start of this. There are some stipends that are that given how we are currently structured as a school are not going to go away anytime soon. The most notable of those are for coaching, and the other one is for being a middle school class dean, because those class deans teach full time and then they're deans on top of it. And that is done because of the way our middle school is structured. It's not worth going into the details, but until we sort of change the structure of how teaching is done in the middle school, we will live with those stipends. Another thing I was going to say about stipends. I think there is less of a mentality around, oh, you're asking me to do this thing, where is my stipend? That has definitely gone away. And the other thing that we did is, we go back to the matrix itself, there is a point system that is used to value each of the different extra activities that are expected of teachers. For example, chaperoning school dances, going on field trips, etc. And where you're placed on the matrix impacts how many points you need to garner in a particular year, with actually the faculty on the furthest right column having to garner the most points in any given year. And that's another way we tried to eliminate stipends, by saying, this is how we're piecing together your overall job, and that includes these other things. So
we've had a question about what sort of the average percentage increase is when you move from one level to the next.
So in the year that we're in, it was sort of in that 8 to 10% range, depending on where you were moving.
And then we've also had another question about the points that you just mentioned for the various different duties and how those are tracked.
Those are tracked, I believe, by our academic dean. So she works with her assistant to, I think they solicit input from faculty in terms of what their preferences are, and then they, I think, try to honor those preferences as best they can, but obviously not 100%. And they don't tend to change that much year to year. So once they were assigned, then they pretty much stayed the same unless we see some shifts in the needs of the school. And then we'll have a conversation about the faculty members impacted by those changes, or a faculty member might, want to make a change, and we respond to that. And then I think, the other outcome is, I think that our teaching, although already extraordinary, has really just gone to a whole new level in terms of, I think our teachers are even more innovative than they were before this change. I think they're more dynamic, and they're even more student-centric, because the evaluation program really focused them on those things, and then the compensation system really got their attention as to why it was important that their evaluation come out really well. And then the other thing is, I think we already had a very collaborative faculty, and it is even more collaborative now. And I think there's a lot more sharing of practice in a way that's really benefiting all students at Cal-ISBOA.
Kathy, we have another question. I don't know if we can get to this or not, but somebody would like to know if how or if this plan transfers equitably to the admin side of the school.
So great question. We were in the process this year of moving our staff to Folio, with the exception of our food service and our maintenance staff. We do all that in-house, and it was a feeling of those two teams that Folio didn't really work as well for them. But of course, then COVID-19 reared its head, and I don't think we will get to that. But the long and short of it is, yes, we're going through a similar process on the staff side, where we're revamping how we do evaluation. And then we'll also look at compensation. And I would say that our compensation, of course, on the staff side is already more differentiated than it is on the teaching side previously was, because we're benchmarking individual positions based on Cal-ISBOA data. But we are trying to bring the evaluation and the growth mindset to the staff side. I don't know that the compensation changes will be as dramatic as they were for faculty.
And another question is, how long did the consultant work with you?
So that was before my time, but I believe that it was 2 to 3 months. But I don't know, so I could find out the answer to that. I joined Cal-ISBOA in 2015. Sorry, no, 2014. So that was the year before I came.
And back to the points. So are all activities equal? And so, for instance, if you chaperone a trip, is that the same as overseeing a student group for a year, or how?
No.
And
No, there was a whole process that the Dean of Faculty and the Academic Dean went through, and then got feedback, of course, from faculty about equivalency. So, you know, this bucket of things are all worth one, you know, so, you know, chaperoning a dance is equivalent to a field trip, let's say, daytime field trip, okay? So that's each 1 point.
Right.
And then there's a whole category of things for which you get 2 points, and another category for which you get 3, and I can't remember if it goes up to 4. But yes, different activities and contributions to the community are evaluated differently.
Should we do our last poll and then go back to questions?
Of course, that sounds great. Let's see, now that I got the hang of this, I think. Okay, so the last question is, what is the biggest challenge with your faculty compensation system? And there are some choices for you there. And I know for some of you, maybe more than one is true, but maybe just the best answer. Okay, looks like most people have answered. Share the results. So you can see that there's quite a distribution, and like I said, probably more than one of these is true for many of you, but it looks like lack of transparency and does not align with the school's needs are the 2 top results. And I would say that was true for us as well. I'm curious what's in the other category. So if anybody wanted to share you know, what was in other, love to hear that.
Just to confirm, I think you said that coaching a sport was not, it was a separate thing. It was a stipended activity.
It's still stipended.
So you're not getting points for coaching a sport.
No, that would be a lot of points.
Right, that's exactly right. And I don't know if you know, somebody was asking about the website for the folio tool. That's a separate thing, right? Who developed folio?
I can't remember. I think it started at a school. I can't remember who developed it.
You know, I'll look that up, but oh, it's in notes. I'm going to point this to I'll put this link out to everybody. It's actually hang on. I'm going to share this with everyone. Someone just posted it to me privately. So there you go. That should answer your question.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Danielle. Any other questions? Okay, here we go. Okay, so here's a question. After ranking the faculty to the new 3-band system, was there still a strong correlation between the old seniority-based system for ranking faculty and the new system?
No. And that's why we saw that the increases for the newer faculty, the median was twice what the median was overall for all faculty. And so what it clearly showed us is that, at least for our faculty, basing on years of experience was not accurately reflecting the contributions that those faculty members were making to students and to our school.
Do you feel that you lost any faculty, that faculty moved on because they were not where they thought they were going to be?
We have not. We almost did. There were a couple we thought we were going to lose, and to their credit, instead they decided to really gut it out, and both of those people have now moved up on our matrix to where they thought they should be.
That's a great result.
It was, and you know, we were nervous about it when they were so unhappy and threatening to leave.
Are the salary ranges published and visible to everyone?
Internally, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And then kind of a follow-up to the question about where people landed relative to where, relative to seniority. Did some senior faculty end up with a pay cut after changing to
Oh, yeah. So, so we had some longtime faculty. I think both of them have now retired. They have now retired. Who were very against the system, even though they were all excellent teachers and they would have been given the highest designation, but they did not want to participate. And we said that existing faculty could choose not to participate. And so those 3 did not. Again, I think they probably would have made more in our new system, but we just told them we'd give them a cost of living increase if they didn't want to participate. But anybody newly hired into the school was not given the choice, obviously. But 100% of our faculty are on it now. The first year or 2, that was not true. And nobody got a pay cut. So that's the other thing. We do have a couple of people that we are carrying who are getting, I would say, even our cost of living increase is always based on the Bay Area and not like national. So I would say we give them nationally based cost of living increases, not Bay Area, to try to catch the matrix up to where they are, basically.
And when are contracts distributed in that cycle vis-a-vis the folio conversations?
So like I said in that slide, the folio conversations are going on year round. So they start, when the faculty get back in September, October, and then, they continue throughout the year. So there's still conversations even after they get their contracts. But they get their contracts in February. We always send them out like the week before NAIS conference, something like that, which I think many of you probably do as well.
Any other questions? I've heard about this effort of yours for a long time, and I'm fascinated by it. So here's another question. What were the stipends referred to in the title that were eliminated, and how were they eliminated?
Oh gosh, we had all sorts of stipends. I'd have to pull up my spreadsheet, for, if you agreed to, if you agreed to work with a colleague on a particular project or something, or share what you were doing in your classroom with your colleagues, we would stipend for that. We're not doing that anymore.
Here's a great question for this group, I think. What role does the director of HR play?
So the director of HR works closely with the 4 academic administrators doing the evaluation. So she's not doing the evaluation herself, but what she is doing is sitting down with them on their regular meetings to make sure there's consistency across how they're talking about evaluation, how it's being applied, and then helping to arrange the conversations about the matrix placement. I think she sometimes participates in those meetings, particularly if it's going to be a difficult conversation.
Do you ever do bonuses, e.g. new hire, retention, or holiday?
No.
And how much time roughly would an administrator spend per teacher per year on the evaluation?
Oh gosh. I am not the right person to answer that. So if somebody wanted to email me, I could probably try to get an answer for you. A lot. It's a lot.
And this may also be, but how many teachers do each of the 4 administrators review? So
well, there are, like I said, there are about 57 faculty. So what would that be? They're each doing, 12 or 13, depending.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else? We've got a couple more minutes. We're right on time. I thought this was excellent. And as I said, I've been hearing about this for years, so I was very curious about it. I'm seeing something I don't really understand, but Barbara, if you want to clarify that question, that would be helpful.
Which ones?
Leadership or HR? Who initiated this change, leadership or HR?
This really came out, and I meant to mention this earlier. I apologize. This really came out of our strategic plan, and really our head of school, who took over as head of school in, let's see, this is her. She must have taken over as head of school maybe in 2011, something like that, 2012. And she, having been a faculty member herself, and then also the dean of academics and an assistant head, she really wanted a system that really truly rewarded excellence and really promoted collaboration and a growth mindset. So that had been incorporated into the strategic plan that she led with our board. And so it was very much driven by that. And I would also say we don't have the same HR person today that we did when this whole process started. So.
Do you still do department chair stipends?
They get a one course relief. So they teach 3 classes instead of 4. That's a big job, like with the budgeting, you know, we do zero-based budgeting. That's a huge job, being a department chair. Oh, and they're involved, by the way, they're involved in the evaluation too. So I should have mentioned that. So those 4 oversee it. But if the dean of faculty is evaluating somebody in the math department, then the math department chair is involved in the evaluation.
Well, we are out of time, and we have our final general session, which is building financial intelligence for today's HR leader. And now that we've got 2 of these changes under our belt, I think you can find it, and I look forward to seeing you there. And Kathy, thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. And thank you all. And please be in touch with me if you have any questions.
And we will post the materials, and we'll let you know when those are available. So thank you.
Bye. Thank you.